In this video, we've got a customer C15 that's getting a rebuild, and for the first time, I couldn't get some of the head bolts out. It's not that they wouldn't loosen, they loosened fine. Just I couldn't literally get them out of the cylinder head here. They were so packed with carbon, it was, well, causing this problem where it seized in the cylinder head, so we had to get kind of creative to get them out of there. Never had to use a pry bar to get head bolts out, folks. Of course, ended up pulling the head off. And as you can probably suspect, head gasket not in the greatest of shape, but how bad is it? Well, you just have to watch the video to find out for yourself. So what we've got here, folks, is an MBN. And this customer had called, or well, not called, they had emailed me a couple months ago and saying, hey, we want you to come out and do a rebuild on this engine. And I'd never been out to their shop before. And then they needed to run the truck a little bit longer. One of their other trucks went down, and they knew it was eating coolant. This one was, but they had to keep running it. And these were some of the driest head bolts pulling it out. And I don't believe this head has ever been off before. At least they don't believe it's ever been off before. And now, I got to give this customer a lot of credit. They really got this thing ready for me. They pulled the hood, radiator. They took the turbocharger off, the fan drive, all that stuff before I got there. They drained the coolant. Made it a lot easier to get this head off. I think I had all the head bolts loosened in about 3 hours. However, as you can see, I can't get some of them out. Now, they were very tight. I usually break them loose by hand with a 3/4 long breaker bar. And yet these ones were those ones where you're rocking the truck trying to get them to crack loose. But luckily, they did all crack loose. But as you can see, I can't get them out. They are literally stuck in there. Let me get this bridge out of the way so you can see a little better. And we've got, yeah, this is between 3 and 4 here. And that one came out not too bad. But as you can see, it's not falling back in there. They appear to be just completely carbon coated, which generally, folks, not a good sign. That usually means you have a bad head gasket, which is very common, especially on, which this one doesn't really have super high mileage, but the engine has been consuming coolant and overheating. And yeah, as you can see, you can't even differentiate really the threads. It's basically a combination of rust and carbon there, and combustion gases, of course. All sorts of fun stuff. This one is a real pain here. It's so close to the head there too. It's hard to get a good spot to grab it with. So I'm gonna try a variety of things here. Good old indexing pry bar here. Figured this would be able to pull it out, but fortunately, if you pry here, it kind of pushes the bolt away, so you need to pull straight up. But as you can see, yeah, not moving at all. I have never had this before. Of course, I've seen bolts coated in carbon before, but yeah, usually they'll still pull up, especially after you loosen them, because then you've rotated the bolts several times. This being a fine thread, you probably rotate it 20, 25 times even to get it all the way up. So we're going to try some creative engineering here, folks. If I can get it to rotate, usually it'll pull up, I'm thinking. Not working. So frustrating, because when you hit the gun to rotate it, it pushes the pry bar off of there. I need like a... Now that I'm watching this, if I had a large enough pickle fork or something, that might have worked well. It's just such a weird location, because you got your valve springs on either side, and then this seam for the lip for the valve cover base. Hey, we're getting there a little bit. And it falls back in, of course. What a pain. So yeah, this customer, he did the right thing. They knew it needed rebuilt back in March. He ordered the parts. Parts were sitting there. He got a new head and a rebuild kit. And I was set to come out, and then they said, hey, look, unfortunately we have one of our other trucks. This isn't a huge trucking company with 800 trucks. So one of their other trucks went down. So they had to run this one for a little longer. And he asked me, he's like, he's think it's okay to run? I was like, well, ideally, if you suspect a bad head gasket or something, it's not the greatest thing to run it, but it's you know, if it's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to down the truck, you know, I would probably run it, and he did. Of course, once the other truck was done, they got this one down, and here I am trying to pull this sucker out, which is super frustrating. So, yeah, once I get these, hopefully I can get these head bolts out. I'm going to change the angle here so you can actually see. It's one of my bigger pry bars, too. It's like a 36-inch handle, just trying to get this freaking thing out of here. Yeah, I've never had one this stiff before. Just literally, it's like one solid carbon rod at this point. There's not even really threads anymore. It's just solid. Haven't had that before. What's the worst head bolt you guys have seen? I'm sure you've seen some ones. If I can get that one out there. There's only one left, which is between, which kind of doesn't really make sense, and you'll see why later in the video, between 5 and 6. Of course, if you do have a bad head gasket, it'll push carbon and heat and combustion gases into weird spots. And that's kind of what happened here, because it wasn't just around the head gasket failure you'll find where we were getting these problems with the carbon around the bolts. So finally got that sucker out of there. I got these Cat branded cargo work pants. Look at that thing. You can't really even, it's almost smooth where the threads are. There's so much carbon in there. What a pain. But yeah, I got these Cargo Cat branded work pants at Costco, and if you see them there, they were on sale. They're actually very comfortable. They're thick. They're not like a khaki where they're real thin material. They're about as thick as jeans are, but they're flexible, so they're stretchy, and they've got double pockets, and they're really nice. I bought quite a few. I would highly recommend them if you're looking for some work pants. Yeah, that was the rearmost one, number 3. You can see I really had to pop that sucker out with the big pry bar. Man, yeah, look at that carbon. It's literally, there's a coating on there about a 1/16 of an inch thick. You can almost see here if I can remove it. Look at that. That is a lot of unburned fuel. I think there's more carbon on these bolts than there probably is on the exhaust system of this engine. But luckily they don't look pitted. Hopefully the head bolts are reusable there. So getting ready to pull this head. Yeah, it was, since they did a lot of the work. So when I got here, they had the valve covers on, the peanut cover on, but they had the fan drive off, the cooling package out, the front bumper off, all the coolant drained out, obviously, because the cooling package was out. They had the turbo off, some of the air compressor lines, some of the connectors for the coolant temp sensor and stuff. So they had, probably about half of the head stuff off for pulling the head. And then I believe he wants to do a front main seal, which I've actually got a tool from Monaco to help do that. And I've been wanting to make a video on that. So we're going to do front main, I believe. And he has a aftermarket, it's an IPD rebuild kit, which actually I've been kind of interested to see. People have asked me about IPD, and I've never used any other stuff, so I'm interested to see my opinion on that. He's got an aftermarket head. Not sure the brand on the aftermarket head. Looks to be the same one that I kind of have used several times before. They seem to sell a lot of these instead of the Cat ones. And of course, I'm sure we'll find other stuff. I'm sure we're going to probably need to do counterbore cutting on this. And I didn't even plan to do any video on this as far as the rebuild goes. I did have a special video sequence for the main bearings, which I'm definitely going to try and do that, and you'll see why when I do that. But I wasn't planning on doing it for pulling the head. I've got several videos on pulling cylinder heads and checking liner protrusion and cutting counterbores, so I don't need a 10th video on that. But, anytime I find something interesting, figure why not get it on film, and, people seem to like it. So I've got these, I believe these are 1,000 kilogram rated straps, which in America, we'd say 2,200 pound straps. Was it 2.2 pounds per kilogram, I believe. So definitely enough for this. Now what I've got here is something I wish I knew about a lot earlier. It's one of these little chain lever hoists. Oh my goodness. They are so useful for pulling heads. I'll put a link to them if you haven't used one before, but it comes in handy when pulling a head or anything weird because it lets you pull Well, it doesn't let you push, but it'll let you pull in any direction. It'll stay there, and then you can ratchet it back if you need to. Which on these cylinder heads like this, it really comes in handy because you have to get over the cam gear hump of the front structure. So you have to pull the head up significantly, especially on a forklift like this where you can't take it through the side. If I was using my gantry crane, we could pick it up and then rotate it through the side there since the turbo's off, but we're using a forklift. I might use my gantry crane to set this head. I'm trying to kind of debating on that. I do prefer it, but then it's a lot more work to, of course, bring it out and set it up. So, gonna get this. It's a pretty nice, clean shop here too. And yeah, we're just pulling it here. These are the two on-site mechanics. They did all the work as far as pulling the hood and cooling package and stuff. So, great group of guys out there. So getting the head, I believe these heads weigh bare. They're 450 pounds, something like this. This has the cam in it, so it's probably closer to 500 pounds. If the turbo's on, it might be closer to 600 with the manifold and stuff, but getting her off of there. And this first chance we get to see the head gasket. Peel this puppy off. If you watch the fire ring, although I wouldn't call it a ring anymore, it's more of a C shape now. Watch this when I pull the head gasket off. It actually falls off. It's kind of funny. Explaining the mysteries of life to these guys. And yep, there with the fire ring. And yeah, this head gasket's toast. I'll kind of, let me show you a close-up here. That's one of the worst head gaskets I've ever seen, at least in person. The catch of the day here, folks. Oh, yeah. Now that we got the head off, we need to go take a look at our cylinders and see how bad they look. But before we do that, how about a little destruction of the week? This week's Destruction of the Week comes from Jordan, and this is out of a 496 big block Chevy that's actually in a Freightliner, and it runs on propane. And as you can see, not running anymore, folks. This is the oil. Apparently, it was consuming coolant. That caused some hydraulicing situation. And have you ever seen, I have never seen this before. It literally knocked a hole through the rocker arm with the valve stem. Thank you, Jordan, for sending these pictures. Let's get back to our work in hand here. So I placed the head gasket here. You can kind of see where it was. And yeah, that's normal firing there, folks. That's not normal. Pretty typical head gasket failure, though, although worse, definitely worse than normal. Between the cylinders, generally I found it's number 4 a lot of the times here. So yeah, between 4 and 5, that's where the firing failed. Now the bolts that we were having the most problems were between 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Now there were carbon on the bolts between 4 and 5, but they came out. Now there's a weird lip, like the combustion gas has burned part of the spacer plate away here, which creates a problem, folks, because usually I'll do liner protrusion, and you need a good spacer plate to do liner protrusion to see your liner heights. But with this one being burned away like that, I don't want to reuse it. And you can see it's been eating coolant on number 4. Causes a rust there. But with it eaten away there, I don't want to clean this, because usually if they're going to reuse the spacer plate, I'll clean it, clean the deck as best I can, and then measure our liner height. However, with the damage to the spacer plate, I don't want to spend an hour cleaning this and wasting time and money on the customer's time if they're not going to reuse the spacer plate. Why are you going to clean a part you're going to throw away? Not only that, with it being damaged there, I don't know that that would necessarily affect our reading, but I don't want it to throw off the reading. So I think the best case scenario here is going to be we're going to pull the cylinder packs out, and customer's going to have to get a new spacer plate. And with the new spacer plate, what I'll do is after I pull the liners out, we'll see how the liner seats are on the deck. And any ones that look suspect, we'll have to cut them counterbores. And then, of course, with a new spacer plate, we can do the liner protrusion after. You know, folks, sometimes liner protrusion lies to you also. I've seen where we have a blown head gasket, the liner protrusion actually measures technically within spec. See the spacer plate shim here, actually not burned away. But the area between the cylinder liners is eaten away, even though your readings are within spec. Because, of course, you can't read that area between the liners there because the head bolts are really in the way, and it's such a narrow channel. So, in my opinion, it's more important to inspect the liner seat area necessarily than it is to do your liner protrusion. Now, the liner protrusion is also very important. More important upon reassembly than disassembly, just to make sure you don't have one that's really low or really high. As you can see, these head bolt holes are horrible. The ferrule areas look pretty good, but the head bolt holes, all of them have rust. Most of them have carbon. Not most of them, maybe a third of them. Some of them are literally packed with carbon. So we're going to have to really clean that out. I'm going to use some solvent, get in there, and retap the holes. I always retap the holes anyway. These definitely need it, though. Probably going to have to go through it twice. Probably use some penetrating oil on the threads also. And yeah, this is the solvent. We're kind of using this to flush and break up the rust and carbon in there. We'll evac it and retap the holes because, yeah, you don't want those to be filled with carbon or rust, especially on reassembly, but you end up using those holes quite often. For your counterbore cutting machine, you need to use the head bolt holes. Do your liner protrusion, use the head bolt holes. And then, of course, upon final assembly, use the head bolt holes. And if they're dirty, you're going to get false readings. You're going to get less accurate cuts, less accurate readings on your liner projection readings. So it's super critical. These are the most important holes to keep tapped, in my opinion, folks, because they can get like this where they're just full of junk. So we got the old 3/4 fine thread tap here, cleaning these holes up. And I found generally you want to clean them with penetrating oil or some sort of fluid in the holes. Not necessarily, you can't really hydrolock this. Obviously, you don't want to run a hole or a bolt in a hole that has any sort of liquid in it, can break the block. But a tap has flutes, so it can't really do that because the fluids are just leaking out around it. But generally, I'll use penetrating oil at this point. What I'll do is I'll spray some in there, and then as I'm rotating it, I'll try to spray a little more if it's getting seized. Some of these were a pain in the butt. As you can see, I'm hand turning this one. So I used to use a big air drill. It was a 1/2-inch chucked air drill for this, and that seemed to work pretty good. It was pretty weak, though, as far as its turning torque. Not that you need 100 foot-pounds. So I've been using this ratchet. It seems to work. You don't want to do it super high speed because you obviously are using a tap. You don't want to damage the threads or anything like that. And we're just flushing out. You can see the red rust coming right out of that hole. And sometimes, yeah, you have to run it in, clean it some more, run it back in if it was a problem. Pain in the butt, yes. You know, it's not the funnest work. It's very tedious to do this, but it's so critical for your final end product because, you know, at the end of the day, would it really matter if you save 30 minutes of time, but your head bolts were only torqued to 250 foot-pounds instead of 330 because you got a false torque rating because your holes are full of rust? I highly doubt the customer would want to save that 30 minutes of time there. And like I said, it's so important to get these head bolt holes as clean as you can. So what I'll usually do after that is I'll use an SOS sample tube, and then I'll pull out the fluid. Now, the head bolts don't bottom out in the bores. They go probably 3/4, maybe 7/8 of the way down there. And you can kind of see on this rusted head bolt how much engagement you get of the threads, which is kind of funny because it's threaded way farther than they contact. And you can see how much of the tap needs to go in to clean up. Now, the head bolt hole is not threaded all the way to the top, though, so it's kind of a misnomer to say, okay, we only need to tap it that far in because the top, almost, well, maybe not an inch, but quite a bit of the top of the head bolt hole is not threaded. So what you really have to do is compare your depth of your threads to your depth here. So you can see you've almost got to go all the way down to the tap retainer. Yeah, I'd say about a quarter of an inch away from that, or else you're not fully retapping this hole, at least where the threads of the head bolt go. So, which is kind of a pain. It'd be nice if you could just run it in for half an inch and then it's good to go, but unfortunately on these, that's not the case. You really have to go down. And this one, I think I ended up retapping 3 times and cleaning it out 3 times before I actually was able to get it clean enough. But yeah, that's I wanted to do liner protrusion on this day, folks, but unfortunately that's just not in the cars. Don't have a proper spacer plate to use here. So plan is next time I'm out here, we're going to pull the cylinder packs, pull the oil pan, maybe do liner. Well, we won't be doing liner protrusion. Probably doing some counterbore cutting and maybe the main bearings. So hope you guys enjoyed this one, working on truck again, and catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.